David Cameron. Well, joining me now is the UKIP MP Douglas Carswell. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. Before I come to you, Markfield, recent reports suggest that the Prime Minister is preparing to water down plans to ban EU migrants from claiming in-work benefits for 4 years. In fact, it's been talked about they'll only be able to do it for a few weeks. Would you like him to stick to the plan of 4 years?
Well, I'd like him to stick to the plan and put this forward. Inevitably, there's a negotiation that will have to take place. And I think the important thing about all of the reforms. The EU clearly is a body that needs reform. I'm under no illusions about that. I don't think it's a perfect institution at all. However, what we need to recognise is that this is a down payment of reforms here. I hope we will get a package that we will put to the electorate at some point in the next year or so. However, the truth is this has got to be not a destination but a process that will go on, I think, for some years to come, and reform is something we need to take a lot of other EU members on that journey with us.
Right. If, though, like many of the other things on that shopping list, although we don't quite know the detail, but David Cameron's been advised by senior civil servants that they're not achievable. As you say, it is a journey. Is that going to really be enough to convince people on trust, on something happening down the line that actually we may not get
I would
something
hope so.
as important in your mind as banning in-work benefits?
Well, I think this whole issue of migrants and welfare benefits is an important part of it, but there are things such as to do with the broader competitiveness agenda, making sure that Britain, as a nation that is going to forever be outside the Eurozone, is protected in its economy. But I think the important thing, as I say, is that there's a package that David Cameron comes back with, not just for UK exceptionalism, but other reforms that we can that need to happen in the EU as a whole, but also a programme of reform that will extend well beyond our referendum.
Right. David Cameron says that a vote to leave the EU is not risk-free. Do you accept that?
I think the really risky option would be to say that we're going to remain part of a group of countries that has lost control. The EU can't deal with the huge economic and demographic and technological changes that are happening around the world. The EU's lost control of its agenda. It can't control its currency, it can't control its borders. The risky option would be to throw our lot in with a failing project.
Right.
We need to take back control. That
But my question is,
risk.
do you accept the point that it's not risk-free to leave the EU?
I think that the less risky option is to take back control as a country. The high-risk option is to leave it all to these supposed mythical reforms that never actually seem to happen.
But do you think there's a more honest argument coming now from the Prime Minister, as he says it's not about whether the UK could survive outside the EU? He accepts that, it seems. It could survive outside the EU. It's about which option will make the UK more prosperous and more secure. So there's a more honest argument happening.
But I think if he was going to be really honest, he would tell us, A, he's planning on having this next June. B, he's not going to get any significant New Deal, and he's doing expectation management to try and present his New Deal as a big win. I have to say, if there's honesty, I don't think the CBI is really the forum to discuss honesty and attitudes to Europe, given that they've been producing some rather dodgy polling.
Is he going to present it as a big win?
No, I don't think he is. I think he will be very candid about it. I think looking at the other options, what are the other options?
Well, if he's going to be really candid about it, can we see a list of these supposed reforms?
Well, it's part of the negotiation process. We're going to have a letter tomorrow. It won't be an absolute bullet point hit list, but it will look at the areas in which we're looking to continue negotiating. And I've been very struck that not just David Cameron, but actually Philip Hammond, David Lidington have been out, not just in Germany, but in many of the European capitals in the last few months. They're looking to build an alliance for making the sort of reform that everyone recognises that the EU needs. I think you do have to look at the other options, Joe. I think you're right. The notion that we can somehow restate the sort of Commonwealth. The Indians laugh at the facility, how facile that prospect is. Australia and New Zealand see themselves now as Asian nations, and what's happened in Canada, we might well have been able to cut some sort of deal with Stephen Harper. I don't think Justin Trudeau thinks
trade
the
globally without signing away control of our own affairs. I think it's perfectly possible for us to trade closely with
Norwegians and the Swiss. They trade with the EU in a very big way.
Being outside the EU.
They're outside the EU.
Yeah,
but
it is
and
possible.
don't have.
It is possible. Well, their officials don't, because they negotiated the status they have as a prelude to joining.
The problem you have, Douglas, is that the European Union you just described in your opening sentence is unrecognisable to the millions of people who visit. You've got to let me finish. It's unrecognisable to the millions of people who visited Europe in the last couple of months. You described something that is just destitute.
I think morally,
economically and socially.
In any price is not really going to be
let's come to that.
Hang on,
let me
the hyperbole
wait
way
a minute.
that he described.
But isn't it true? It's fair to say the Labour Party's position is to stay in, whatever reform, isn't it?
Yes, but also to focus on reform. Now, basically, it comes down to the fact that people in this country they are supportive of being part of the European Union.
Well, we're going to have a referendum, we'll see, won't we?
We absolutely will, and let's bring that on quickly and stick to the debate.
But most of Westminster are in at any price, but let's see if the voters...
On that, can I just...
To be fair, I mean, you and I were both in the same lobby, famously, in November of 2011, very much promoting the idea of a referendum. I'm very keen that we have a referendum. I think the public need to have a say, and as you say, they will decide.
The European Union to stop meddling in details of the way we run our country and focus on the big issues. It's as simple as that.
Right. Stay with us. Hang on. Well, David Cameron was speaking at the CBI conference in central London. Their Director General, John Cridland, joins us now. Welcome to the programme, John Cridland. The Prime Minister argues that a vote to leave the EU isn't risk-free, but he rules nothing out if he can't secure necessary reform. Do you rule nothing out?
I'm encouraged that the Prime Minister is serious about reform, and that reform process is what we will need to convince British business and the British public that Europe is the way forward. So for me, reform is everything, and we've heard first from my own Prime Minister committing to a strong reform agenda, and then we've heard from the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland, how important it is that he helps support Britain on getting the reform because Ireland wants Britain in.
Right.
So most businesses want to stay in a reformed EU. I've never claimed all, but reform is the issue of the day.
Right. Is it true that all businesses say they want to stay in, or a vast, certainly majority of your members? Vote Leave, one of the groups campaigning to get Britain to leave the EU, claims that 8 out of 10 firms who attended the July meeting of the CBI's President's Committee aren't actually allowed to support any kind of political campaigning. So whose views are you representing?
So I'm representing the views of 190,000 businesses, which through the CBI's 140 trade associations we speak for, employing 7 million workers. And the large majority of those want to remain in a reformed EU, not the EU of the status quo. And I'm always happy to debate with Vote Leave on the issues. They don't seem to actually want to debate on the issues. They just want to debate on bits of process.
Right, well, let's ask Douglas. I mean, take those figures. I mean, there's John Cridland saying that the majority of his members, or the majority of people that he speaks to in business, do want to stay within a reformed EU.
CBI polls measure business attitudes to Europe the way that Volkswagen's engine tests measured diesel emissions.
Really? That's
something inherently dodgy. Very dodgy. And it's not me saying this, it's the British Polling Council that says there's something very dodgy. They claim that 8 out of 10. Let's look at some
It's being investigated. They haven't actually said that, Douglas Carswell, so don't jump to the investigation conclusion.
Let's look at some objective assessment. For example, Ernst & Young, the Federation of Small Businesses, Business for Britain have produced polling data from businesses that show actually business is very divided on this issue.
Well, let's put that back to John Cridland. Dodgy, says Douglas Carswell, in terms of the way the polling is done by you.
Well, I can speak with a strong mandate from my members. I spent 5 years in this job. I don't think I'd be doing this job if I wasn't speaking for the voice of British business, small, medium and large. There's more than 1,000 small and medium-sized businesses in the room behind me. They have listened patiently and politely to political speakers who've debated this issue this morning. Of course, there's a variety of view. The more international the business, including the small business, the more likely they are to see the upsides of Europe. The more domestic the business, the more likely they are to see the downsides. So you'd expect different business organisations with different membership profiles to come up with different results.
All right, well, let's have a look at some of these pictures, because as the Prime Minister was speaking, some protesters there unfurled a banner which said CBI, Voice of Brussels. I think you can see it there. Was a student group. Now, they clearly don't think you would ever recommend to leave the EU, whatever happens, reform or not. Are they right?
So there were 2 demonstrators and there was 1,000 other people in the room, and the demonstrators were politely heard, just as I hope my views are.
Yeah, but you haven't answered my question, which is, my question though is, you said you desperately want reform. If there is no substantive reform, John Cridland, would you recommend to your voters that they vote to leave the EU?
So I'm confident there will be reform, but we will take that reform package back to CBI members and ask them for a renewed mandate.
Right.
So we're not unconditional on being in the EU. We want a reform package. If we get it, we'll then ask our members whether they are satisfied with it.
Well, that's
Welcome
clear.
to democracy.
They're going to ask their members again.
Well,
they're not just going to take
leaked minutes from the CBI's own board meetings show that they're not being straight. They're for in at any price. The CBI leadership is obsessed about promoting the EU. They wanted Britain to join the euro a decade ago. They wanted us to join the ERM in the 1980s. They're wrong then, and they're wrong now.
Right,
and they're not being straight.
But Douglas Carswell, you say they may not. But hang on, John Criddle, I will come back to you just to... Hang on, repeat what you just said. We missed that.
I've never believed in joining the euro. I am Director General of the CBI. I speak for the organisation.
Hang on.
I'm not in favour of joining the euro. But all you seem to want to do is talk over other people who are putting forward their point of view.
Now, Douglas Carswell, don't talk over him just because we want to be able to hear everybody. But what the question, actually, from what John Cridland said, is even if the leadership of the CBI decide that they will and would advocate to stay in, they are going to give their members a chance to have their say and a judgment. Surely that's enough.
I think it's good that they're going to ask their members.
So there isn't going to be a blanket.
The poll that they produced already claiming that 8 out of 10 businesses support being in the EU is inherently dodgy, and I think we have to question whether or not the leadership of the CBI genuinely reflects business opinion. There are other voices out there that have produced objective data that show that actually business is divided on the issue. Big companies that can afford to hire lobbyists in Brussels might like the Brussels system. Other businesses that can't afford to hire lobbyists, other organisations that are not big banks and big lobbyists might actually recognise, and many do recognise, that actually the single market...
Can I just welcome the fact the
Yes,
CBI exists to consult its members, to speak for its members. The idea that you want...
There are other organisations.
Do you know, I'm sitting here with 2 bastions of conservatism, and I'm pretty proud that me, as a comprehensive boy, am the only person that has the manners to let someone finish a sentence round here. 1-0 for public education and however much is spent on your 2 at the moment. But it's right that CBI listens and represents its members. That's the right process to go through, and I'm proud that they're doing it. They need to speak with a voice and listen and consult. John does not exist to tell his members what to think. He exists to listen to his members and speak for them.
So you're
Douglas
not worried...
is obsessed with polling and the process of polling.
Yeah.
The process of polling. Let's stick to the issues and let him speak for his members.
But shouldn't it be honest? I mean, shouldn't they be as transparent as possible about what the broad views of business are?
Absolutely right. And John was trying to speak then, but it was spoken over the top of when he was speaking about how the process was transparent.
As a pushy grammar school boy, I should say. Actually, I'll get my
Are we going to go round the circle
well.
here as to where our background is? But yeah, go on.
Douglas, the difficulty of your stance is that you started at the outset saying the whole thing is a sham. We're not going to get any reform. We are going to get some reform. I mean, they're going to say that's nothing like enough. It's all sort of smoke and mirrors, is what you're going to end up saying come the referendum. And I think we are, as I say, going to get a package here. I hope there will be some exceptionalist deals, that we'll be able to get something that's a good deal for Britain, but also we all know that this institution does require reform. There are a lot of institutions we're members of. We're members of the UN, and that disappoints us from time to time. We're members of NATO, and again, there are various elements of that disappoint us. It doesn't mean we just walk out. We want to play an ongoing role and try and make it better for all of our citizens.
All right, can I just before we leave this bit, John Cridland, you're stepping down later this month. You'll be replaced by Carolyn Fairbairn. And on the matter of our membership of the European Union, are you and she at one?
Yes, we are. We want Europe to do more of what it does well and less of what it does badly. British business wants a better deal from Europe, and I'm sure Carolyn, like me, will continue to represent the views of the broad mass of British business who want to be in a reformed EU.
Right, and just briefly, would you be a fan of having that referendum next June?
I want to have the referendum when we've got the reform package so that the British public can make an informed choice.
All right, John Cridland, thank you very much. Next June, you'd be in favour of next June? That's what's been talked about in the papers today,
as soon as possible.
As soon as possible.
I think so. I mean, we are committed to having a package of reform, and that shouldn't necessarily be rushed. We need to get a reform package, but I think for the sake of certainty, let's get this done. And I think probably June or perhaps next autumn would be right.
I'm relaxed about the timeline. The key is to make sure that it's conducted honestly with honest polling.
Douglas Carswell, thank you.